They called it an impossible language. The human read it like a menu. Before we dive into this story, drop a quick hi in the comments and tell me where you're watching from. It really helps support the channel. In the sterile corridors of the Galactic Research Station Omega-7, where the brightest minds from 57 different species struggled to decode what was considered the most complex linguistic puzzle in known history, nobody expected salvation to come from a human janitor mopping floors on the night shift. The ancient text that had stumped xenolinguists for over 2 centuries was about to meet its match in the most unlikely of places. Marcus Dean pushed his cleaning cart down the gleaming hallway, the soft squeak of its wheels echoing through the empty research wing. At 42 years old, he had been working the night maintenance shift at Omega-7 for nearly 3 years, invisible to most of the brilliant alien researchers who barely acknowledged his existence during their daytime activities. His weathered hands guided the mop across the floor with practiced efficiency, while his mind wandered to the bills waiting at home and whether his daughter Emma would remember to take her medicine before school. The research station hummed with activity even during the night cycle, though the corridors were mostly empty. Through the transparent aluminum windows, Marcus could see the vast expanse of space dotted with distant stars and the occasional cargo ship making its way to one of the outer colonies. He had grown accustomed to this view over the years, finding it oddly peaceful during his solitary work hours. As he approached Laboratory Complex 7, Marcus noticed the lights were still on. This was unusual, as most researchers typically finish their work by the end of the day cycle. Curious, he peered through the reinforced glass door and saw 3 figures hunched over a massive holographic display showing symbols that seemed to shift and dance in the blue light. Inside the laboratory, Dr. Kellen Torex, a tall Centaurian with 4 arms and skin that shimmered like oil on water, was experiencing what humans might call a nervous breakdown. His species had evolved from highly intelligent cephalopods, and their natural ability to process multiple complex information streams simultaneously made them excellent linguists. Yet, even with his superior cognitive abilities, the ancient text before them remained as impenetrable as ever. "This is impossible," Dr. Torex muttered, his 3 visible eyes fixated on the holographic symbols, while his 4th eye monitored the computer readouts. "We have been working on this manuscript for 237 years. Every translation algorithm, every linguistic framework, every quantum semantic processor has failed to crack even a single phrase." Beside him stood Dr. Mira Ventaz, a Corvani whose species was renowned for their pattern recognition abilities. Her purple fur had taken on a dull gray tinge from stress, and her large golden eyes were bloodshot from staring at the symbols for countless hours. "The mathematical precision is undeniable," she said, her voice carrying the melodic quality typical of her people. "These symbols follow clear structural rules, but the underlying meaning remains completely opaque. It is as if the language itself exists on a dimensional plane we cannot access." The 3rd figure in the room was Dr. Thorne Blackwell, one of the few humans working in the xenolinguistics department. Unlike Marcus, Thorne had 3 doctorate degrees and was considered one of the foremost experts in dead languages within human space. His brown hair was disheveled, and his clothes showed the wrinkled evidence of someone who had been working for days without proper rest. "Maybe we are approaching this wrong," Thorne suggested, running his fingers through his hair. "We keep trying to apply known linguistic frameworks, but what if this language operates on principles we have never encountered? What if the symbols themselves are not representing sounds or concepts in any way we understand?" Dr. Torex's skin color shifted to a deeper blue, indicating frustration in his species. "That hypothesis has been proposed and tested numerous times. We have tried quantum linguistics, temporal semantics, dimensional morphology, even psionic interpretation protocols. Nothing works. The architects who created this text might as well have been gods for all the sense we can make of their writing." The ancient manuscript they were studying was discovered on a dead world in the Outer Rim, carved into walls of a substance harder than diamond, but somehow still organic. The civilization that created it had vanished millions of years ago, leaving behind only fragments of their incomprehensible language. What made the text so important was not just its age, but the fact that preliminary scans suggested it contained advanced scientific and technological knowledge that could revolutionize galactic society. Marcus finished mopping the corridor outside the laboratory and was about to move on when he heard raised voices from within. The sound of genuine distress in Dr. Torex's voice made him pause. Over the years, Marcus had developed a soft spot for the dedicated researchers, even if they rarely noticed him. He had seen them work countless hours, driven by curiosity and the desire to push the boundaries of knowledge. On impulse, Marcus knocked gently on the laboratory door. The three researchers looked up in surprise as he entered, pushing his cart ahead of him. In the harsh laboratory lighting, Marcus looked exactly like what he was, a working-class human in maintenance coveralls, slightly out of place among the sophisticated equipment and brilliant minds surrounding him. "Sorry to bother you folks," Marcus said, his voice carrying a slight accent from the industrial colony where he had grown up. "I could not help but notice you have been working pretty late. Thought you might want some coffee or something. I keep a pot going in the maintenance office." Dr. Thorne looked up from the holographic display with tired eyes. "That is very kind of you, Marcus, but I do not think caffeine is going to solve our problems tonight." "What kind of problems?" Marcus asked, genuinely interested despite himself. He had always been curious about what went on in the research laboratories, though he had never dared to ask before. Dr. Ventes gestured toward the holographic symbols with one of her clawed hands. "We are trying to translate an ancient alien language that has resisted all attempts at decryption for over 2 centuries. The text appears to contain crucial scientific knowledge, but the linguistic structure is completely unlike anything in our databases." Marcus stepped closer to the holographic display, his cleaning forgotten for the moment. The symbols were indeed beautiful in their own way, flowing and organic yet precise in their mathematical arrangement. They reminded him of something, though he could not quite place what. "Mind if I take a look?" Marcus asked, surprising everyone in the room, including himself. Dr. Torex's skin shifted to a lighter blue, indicating amusement. While he did not mean to be condescending, the idea that a human maintenance worker could succeed where the greatest linguistic minds in the galaxy had failed was absurd. "Of course, though I should warn you that these symbols have stumped experts with centuries of combined experience." Marcus studied the holographic display for several minutes, walking around it to view the symbols from different angles. The researchers watched him with a mixture of polite interest and barely concealed skepticism. To them, this was little more than a brief distraction from their work. "You know," Marcus said slowly, "this reminds me of something I saw once in a technical manual." "A technical manual?" Dr. Thorne asked, his tone indicating he was humoring the janitor. "Yeah, when I was younger, I worked in the fusion reactor maintenance department on Kepler Station. They had these really old instruction manuals for the first-generation plasma containment systems. The documentation was written by this engineer who had a really weird way of organizing information. Instead of using standard technical language, he would arrange the instructions in these flowing, organic patterns that were supposed to mirror the plasma flow itself." Marcus pointed to a cluster of symbols in the upper portion of the display. "See how these symbols here seem to flow into each other? And how they are arranged in these spiral patterns? What if this is not actually a language in the traditional sense? What if it is a technical manual disguised as something else?" The three researchers exchanged glances. This was not the first time someone had suggested the text might be technical in nature, but the specific comparison to maintenance documentation was new. "Even if that were true," Dr. Ventus said gently, "we have tried treating the text as technical documentation. The symbols still do not correspond to any known scientific or mathematical concepts." Marcus continued to study the display, his brow furrowed in concentration. "Maybe that is because you are looking at it wrong. In those old fusion manuals, the guy would not just describe what to do, he would describe the entire process from the perspective of the energy itself. So instead of saying, 'adjust valve A to increase pressure,' he would write something like, 'the eager fire seeks its narrow path through the metal gateway.'" Dr. Torex's four eyes suddenly focused intently on Marcus. This was a perspective none of them had considered. "You are suggesting the language is metaphorical in nature?" "Not exactly metaphorical," Marcus replied, still staring at the symbols. "More like experiential. What if whoever wrote this was trying to explain complex processes by describing them, as if you were actually inside the system being described. He pointed to another section of the text. Look at this cluster here. The way the symbols radiate outward from a central point, then spiral back inward. What if that is not describing an object or concept, but actually describing the experience of something expanding and then contracting? Dr. Thorne leaned forward, his fatigue momentarily forgotten. That would require a completely different interpretive framework. We would need to think in terms of procedural narratives rather than descriptive language. Exactly, Marcus said, warming to his subject. In those old manuals, if you wanted to know how to restart a plasma containment field after an emergency shutdown, you would not find a step-by-step list. Instead, you would find this poetic description of awakening the sleeping star and guiding the lost fire home. It sounded like mystical nonsense, but it actually contained precise technical instructions. Dr. Ventes had begun pacing, her golden eyes bright with sudden excitement. If this hypothesis is correct, then we have been approaching the translation completely backward. We have been trying to extract meaning from individual symbols when we should be looking at the experiential flow of the entire text. But how would we test such a theory? Dr. Torex asked, his skin now shifting through rapid color changes indicating intense mental activity. We would need some way to map these experiential descriptions onto actual physical processes. Marcus scratched his chin thoughtfully. Well, those fusion manuals I mentioned, they had this trick. If you were really stuck on a section, you could physically act out what the text was describing. The engineer who wrote them believed that understanding came through physical experience, not just intellectual analysis. You mean kinesthetic interpretation? Dr. Thorne asked, his eyes widening. That is not entirely unheard of in xenolinguistics, but it is considered a very fringe approach. All I know is that it worked for those manuals, Marcus replied. I spent months trying to figure out how to recalibrate the magnetic containment protocols until I finally just started moving my hands the way the text described. Suddenly it all made sense. Dr. Ventes stopped pacing and stared at Marcus. You were suggesting we physically act out these symbols? Why not? You said you have been stuck on this for 200 years. What is the worst that could happen? The three researchers looked at each other, then back at the holographic display. The idea was unconventional to the point of seeming ridiculous, but they had exhausted every conventional approach. Sometimes breakthrough discoveries came from the most unexpected directions. Very well, Dr. Torex said finally, his skin settling into a determined shade of deep purple. Let us attempt to physically interpret this text. Marcus, would you be willing to help us? Your insights have already proven valuable. Marcus felt a mix of excitement and nervousness. I am just a janitor, document. Are you sure you want my help with something this important? Right now, Dr. Thorne said with a tired smile. You are the closest thing we have to an expert on experiential technical documentation. I think we would be foolish not to include you. They began with a small section of the text, a cluster of symbols that seemed to show a flowing motion from left to right with increasing complexity. Following Marcus's suggestion, they tried to physically enact what the symbols might be describing. Dr. Torex used his forearms to trace flowing patterns in the air, while Dr. Ventes moved in a spiraling motion around the laboratory. Dr. Thorne attempted to mimic the increasing complexity shown in the symbols by starting with simple gestures and gradually making them more elaborate. Marcus watched and offered suggestions based on his experience with the fusion manuals. At first, their attempts felt awkward and unproductive. The movements seemed random and disconnected from any meaningful interpretation. But as they continued, something began to emerge. The patterns in the symbols seemed to correspond to actual physical processes, and when they acted them out in sequence, a story began to unfold. Wait, Dr. Ventes said suddenly, stopping her spiraling motion. I think I understand what this section is describing. It is not a static concept at all. It is a process, a procedure for manipulating quantum field fluctuations. Dr. Torex's skin brightened with excitement. Yes, I can see it too. The flowing motion represents the movement of subatomic particles through a controlled field matrix. The increasing complexity shows how to amplify and focus the effect. Marcus felt a surge of pride as he watched the researchers begin to unlock the mysteries of the ancient text. His simple suggestion had opened a door that centuries of traditional linguistic analysis had failed to breach. They worked through the night, taking turns acting out different sections of the text while the others observed and offered interpretations. Gradually, a picture began to emerge of what the ancient document actually contained. It was not a historical record or philosophical treatise, but rather a comprehensive technical manual for manipulating fundamental forces of the universe. "This is incredible," Dr. Thorne whispered as they decoded a section that appeared to describe faster-than-light communication technology. The architects were not just an advanced civilization. They had mastered principles of physics that we are only beginning to understand. Dr. Ventas had been documenting their translations using the laboratory's quantum processors, building a database of symbols and their corresponding physical interpretations. The implications are staggering. If we can fully decode this manual, it could advance galactic civilization by thousands of years. As dawn approached, bringing with it the start of the day cycle, they had successfully translated nearly 30% of the manuscript. What had once seemed like an impossible jumble of alien symbols now revealed itself as elegant technical documentation for technologies that seemed almost magical in their sophistication. Marcus looked at his chronometer and realized his shift had ended hours ago. He should have been home already, but the excitement of the discovery had kept him engaged throughout the night. "I should probably head home," he said reluctantly. "My daughter will be wondering where I am." Dr. Torex placed one of his hands on Marcus's shoulder, a gesture of respect among his people. "Marcus, you have contributed more to this project in one night than we accomplished in decades of previous work. We would be honored if you would consider joining our research team." Marcus felt overwhelmed by the offer. "I appreciate that, Doc, but I do not have any formal education in linguistics or physics. I am just a maintenance worker who got lucky with a guess." "Sometimes," Dr. Thorne interjected, "fresh perspective is more valuable than formal education. You saw patterns that we missed because you approached the problem from a completely different angle. That kind of insight cannot be taught in any university." Dr. Vint has nodded in agreement. "We have spent so long thinking like academics that we forgot to think like technicians. You reminded us that sometimes the most profound knowledge is hidden in the most practical places." Marcus considered the offer carefully. The opportunity to work on such an important project was tempting, but he also had responsibilities at home. "Could I maybe help out part-time? I still need to keep my regular job to pay the bills, but I would love to continue working on this translation." "That would be perfect," Dr. Torex replied. "We will arrange for you to receive a research stipend for your contributions. Consider it a consulting fee." Over the following weeks, Marcus split his time between his regular maintenance duties and working with the linguistics team. His practical approach to problem-solving proved invaluable as they encountered new sections of the manuscript that required creative interpretation. The ancient text revealed layer after layer of advanced knowledge. There were detailed instructions for manipulating gravity, creating exotic matter, and even techniques for manipulating time itself on a localized scale. Each new discovery sent ripples of excitement through the galactic scientific community. Word of the breakthrough began to spread throughout the research station and beyond. The story of how a human janitor had cracked the code that stumped the greatest minds in the galaxy became something of a legend. Marcus found himself giving interviews to scientific journals and presenting at conferences, though he always insisted that the real credit belonged to the team as a whole. Dr. Sarah Chun, the director of Omega 7, called a special meeting to discuss the implications of the translation. The conference room was packed with department heads and senior researchers from across the station, all eager to hear about the progress being made on the architect manuscript. "Ladies, gentlemen, and distinguished colleagues," Director Chen began, her voice carrying the authority of someone who had spent decades managing complex scientific projects. "We are gathered today to discuss what may be the most significant scientific discovery in galactic history. Dr. Torex, would you please brief us on the current status of the translation project?" Dr. Torex stood, his skin displaying the formal blue-silver pattern appropriate for official presentations. "Thank you, Director Chen. As of this morning, we have successfully translated approximately 75% of the architect manuscript. The document appears to be a comprehensive technical manual covering advanced applications of quantum mechanics, gravitational manipulation, and temporal physics. A murmur of excitement rippled through the assembled scientists. Dr. Elias Vorn, head of the physics department, leaned forward in his chair. Dr. Torex, what is your assessment of the technological applications described in this manual? The implications are staggering, Dr. Torex replied. We are looking at technologies that could revolutionize space travel, energy production, and our understanding of the fundamental nature of reality itself. Some of the processes described in the manual appear to violate our current understanding of physical laws, yet the mathematical frameworks supporting them are remarkably consistent. Director Chen nodded thoughtfully. And I understand we have Mr. Marcus Dean to thank for the breakthrough in translation methodology? Marcus felt uncomfortable being the center of attention in a room full of distinguished scientists, but he stood when prompted. I just offered a different way of looking at the problem, Director. The real work was done by the linguistics team. Nevertheless, Director Chun continued, your contribution has been invaluable. I have authorized a special commendation for your work, along with a promotion to Research Associate in the Xenolinguistics Department. You have more than earned your place on this team. The applause from the assembled scientists was genuine and enthusiastic. Marcus felt a mix of pride and amazement at how much his life had changed in such a short time. A few weeks ago, he had been an invisible maintenance worker, and now he was being recognized by some of the brightest minds in the galaxy. Dr. Vint has raised her hand to speak. Director, we need to discuss the security implications of this discovery. Some of the technologies described in the manuscript could be extremely dangerous if they fell into the wrong hands. We are talking about weapons that could destabilize planetary systems or temporal manipulation techniques that could alter causality itself. A valid concern, Director Chen acknowledged. I am implementing enhanced security protocols for all research related to the Architect manuscript. Access will be limited to essential personnel only, and all findings will be subject to Galactic Council oversight before publication. As the meeting continued, Marcus found himself thinking about the broader implications of their discovery. The Architect manuscript was not just a collection of advanced technologies, but a window into the mindset of a civilization that had mastered forces beyond current understanding. The experiential nature of their documentation suggested a culture that valued direct, practical knowledge over abstract theorizing. After the meeting, Marcus returned to the linguistics laboratory where Dr. Torex, Dr. Ventaz, and Dr. Thorne were already back at work on the remaining sections of the manuscript. The holographic display now showed a three-dimensional model of the text, with translated sections highlighted in blue and remaining sections marked in red. How are we doing on the final sections? Marcus asked, settling into the chair that had become his usual spot over the past weeks. We are making good progress, Dr. Thorne replied, but we are encountering some sections that seem to describe processes involving consciousness itself. The language becomes even more experiential in these parts, almost as if the architects were trying to explain how to manipulate the fundamental nature of awareness. Marcus studied the symbols on the display, noting their organic, flowing patterns. You know, this reminds me of something else from my maintenance days. We had these old meditation techniques that the stress counselors used to teach for dealing with dangerous work environments. They would describe mental processes using very physical, experiential language. Dr. Ventas looked up from her calculations with interest. Meditation techniques? Yeah, they would talk about moving energy through the body and focusing the mind like a laser beam. At the time, I thought it was just New Age nonsense, but some of the descriptions were remarkably specific and practical. What if these sections are describing techniques for manipulating consciousness the same way the earlier sections described manipulating physical forces? Dr. Torex's skin shifted to the deep purple that indicated intense concentration. That would suggest the architects had developed technologies that could directly interface with biological consciousness. Such capabilities would represent the ultimate fusion of science and what we might call mysticism. They began applying Marcus's experiential interpretation approach to these new sections, but the process proved more challenging than before. The consciousness-related passages required not just physical movements, but mental exercises that pushed the boundaries of what the research team was comfortable attempting. "I am not sure about this," Dr. Thorne said nervously as they prepared to attempt their first interpretation of a consciousness manipulation sequence. "We could be dealing with techniques that might have unpredictable effects on our mental state." The manuscript includes what appear to be safety protocols, Dr. Vint has observed, pointing to a series of symbols that seem to form protective boundaries around the main process descriptions. The architects were clearly aware of the potential dangers and included precautions. Marcus felt a mixture of excitement and apprehension as they began their attempts to decode the consciousness-related sections. The physical movements described in the text were more subtle than those in the technology sections, requiring careful attention to breathing patterns and mental focus. As they worked through the first sequence, something unexpected began to happen. The symbols on the holographic display seemed to respond to their mental state, shifting and changing in ways that corresponded to their levels of focus and understanding. What had seemed like static alien writing began to reveal itself as a dynamic, interactive system. "This is incredible," Dr. Vint has whispered, her golden eyes wide with amazement. The manuscript is not just describing these techniques, it is actually implementing them. The symbols themselves are some kind of consciousness interface technology. Dr. Torex's skin was cycling through rapid color changes as his advanced neural system processed the implications. "We are not just translating a document. We are activating an ancient teaching system designed to guide users through progressively advanced techniques for consciousness manipulation." As they continued working with the interactive manuscript, new levels of understanding began to emerge. The architects had not simply developed advanced technology, they had evolved beyond the limitations of purely physical existence. Their writing system was itself a form of consciousness technology, designed to transfer knowledge directly from mind to mind across the barriers of time and species. The final sections of the manuscript revealed the ultimate purpose of the architect's civilization. They had not vanished or died out, but had transcended physical reality entirely, leaving behind their interactive manual as a guide for other species who might follow their path. The technological knowledge was not an end in itself, but rather a stepping stone toward the development of consciousness abilities that could reshape reality at the most fundamental level. "We need to be very careful how we proceed with this information," Director Chen said when the team briefed her on their latest discoveries. "We are dealing with knowledge that could fundamentally alter the nature of galactic civilization. The potential for both beneficial and catastrophic outcomes is enormous." Marcus found himself at the center of discussions about the future of the architect knowledge. His practical approach and natural caution made him a valuable voice in determining how the information should be shared with the broader scientific community. The responsibility felt overwhelming at times, but he was determined to ensure that the knowledge was used wisely. "I think the architects intended for this information to be discovered gradually," Marcus suggested during one of their planning meetings. "The way the manuscript is structured, with basic technologies leading to more advanced consciousness techniques, suggests they wanted to ensure that any civilization that found it would develop the wisdom to use the knowledge responsibly." Dr. Vint has nodded in agreement. The interactive nature of the later sections supports that theory. The consciousness interface technology only responds to users who have successfully mastered the earlier material. It is like a built-in safety mechanism. Over the following months, the research team worked carefully through the implications of the architect knowledge. They began implementing some of the simpler technologies, starting with improved energy generation systems and enhanced communication arrays. The results exceeded all expectations, providing proof that the manuscript's technical information was not just theoretical, but practically viable. The consciousness-related techniques proved more challenging to study safely. The team established strict protocols for experimentation, working with volunteer test subjects from multiple species to understand how the techniques affected different types of biological consciousness. The results suggested that the architect methods could indeed enhance mental abilities, improve problem-solving capacity, and even enable limited forms of telepathic communication. Marcus's life had been completely transformed by his involvement in the project. He had moved his family to better quarters on the research station and was now pursuing formal education in xenolinguistics and consciousness studies. His daughter Emma, now 14, was fascinated by her father's work and had begun showing remarkable aptitude for language studies herself. "Dad, do you think the architects are still out there somewhere?" Emma asked one evening as they watched the stars through their apartment's viewing portal. Marcus considered the question carefully. "I think they might be, but not in any way we would recognize. The manuscript suggests they evolved beyond physical existence. They might be all around us, just in a form we cannot perceive." "That is kind of scary and amazing at the same time," Emma replied thoughtfully. "Do you think we will ever become like them?" "Maybe someday," Marcus said, putting his arm around his daughter's shoulders. "But I think we have a long way to go before we are ready for that kind of existence. The important thing is that we learn to use their knowledge wisely and responsibly." The translation project had evolved into something far larger than anyone had initially anticipated. What began as an attempt to decode an ancient language had become a comprehensive program for advancing galactic civilization along the path demonstrated by the architects. Research teams from dozens of species were now working together, sharing knowledge and insights in unprecedented cooperation. Dr. Torex had become the project's chief coordinator, his natural abilities making him ideally suited for managing the complex relationships between different research groups. His skin now displayed permanent markings indicating his elevated status within the galactic scientific community, but he remained humble about his role in the discovery. None of this would have been possible without Marcus's initial insight. He often reminded colleagues who praised his contributions. Sometimes the most important breakthroughs come from the most unexpected sources. We academics sometimes forget that wisdom can be found in the most practical places. Dr. Ventus had taken on the task of developing training protocols for the consciousness enhancement techniques, working closely with ethicists and philosophers to ensure that the powerful abilities described in the manuscript were only made available to individuals with the maturity and wisdom to use them responsibly. Dr. Thorne had become something of a celebrity in academic circles, writing papers about the experiential interpretation methodology that was now being applied to other ancient texts throughout the galaxy. His work had opened entirely new fields of study in xenolinguistics and archaeological interpretation. As for Marcus, he had found his true calling in bridging the gap between academic theory and practical application. His unique perspective, combining working-class pragmatism with growing expertise in advanced linguistics, made him an invaluable member of the research community. He had been invited to join the faculty of several prestigious universities, but had chosen to remain at Omega 7, where the original discovery had been made. The impact of the architect knowledge continued to ripple throughout galactic society. New technologies based on the manuscript's instructions were revolutionizing everything from space travel to medical treatment. The consciousness enhancement techniques were being carefully introduced to selected individuals who demonstrated both the intellectual capacity and ethical grounding to use them safely. Perhaps most importantly, the discovery had demonstrated the value of approaching problems from multiple perspectives and the importance of including diverse voices in scientific research. The galactic scientific community had learned that breakthrough insights could come from anyone, regardless of their formal credentials or social status. Marcus often reflected on the series of coincidences and decisions that had led to his involvement in the project. If he had not been curious enough to knock on the laboratory door that night, or if the researchers had not been open-minded enough to listen to his suggestions, the architect manuscript might still be an indecipherable puzzle. The experience had taught him that everyone had something valuable to contribute, and that the most important discoveries often came from unexpected combinations of knowledge and perspective. The translation project was now essentially complete, with over 98% of the manuscript successfully decoded. The remaining sections appeared to be advanced techniques that were beyond current understanding, possibly intended for civilizations that had progressed further along the path of consciousness development than present galactic society. As Marcus stood in the laboratory looking at the fully translated manuscript, he felt a deep sense of satisfaction and wonder. The symbols that had once seemed impossibly alien now told a coherent story of scientific and spiritual advancement that spanned millions of years. The architects had left behind not just knowledge, but a roadmap for the evolution of consciousness itself. Do you ever wonder what we will leave behind for future civilizations? Dr. Ventus asked, joining Marcus at the holographic display. Marcus smiled as he considered the question. I hope we leave behind the lesson that wisdom can come from anywhere, and that the most important discoveries happen when different kinds of people work together. The architects were brilliant, but I think we have something they might not have had. What is that? Dr. Ventus asked curiously. Diversity, Marcus replied. We have dozens of different species, all bringing their unique perspectives to these problems. The architects seem to have been a single species that advanced alone. Maybe that is why they needed to transcend physical reality to continue growing. We might be able to advance even further while staying connected to the physical universe, simply because we have so many different ways of looking at things. Dr. Torex approached them, his skin displaying the warm golden tones that indicated contentment among his people. Marcus, Director Chin would like to speak with you about the next phase of the project. There are other architect sites that have been discovered throughout the galaxy, and they are requesting your assistance in developing new interpretation methodologies. Marcus felt a familiar mix of excitement and responsibility. The success with the first manuscript had opened doors to even greater discoveries, but it had also made him acutely aware of how much power and responsibility came with such knowledge. I would be honored to help, Marcus replied, but I want to make sure we maintain the same careful, ethical approach we have used here. This knowledge is too important to rush or misuse. Agreed completely, Dr. Torex said. That is exactly why your perspective is so valuable. You understand both the potential of this knowledge and the importance of using it wisely. As the three researchers continued their discussion, Marcus thought about how much his life had changed since that night when he had knocked on the laboratory door. He had gone from being an invisible maintenance worker to playing a crucial role in one of the most important discoveries in galactic history. But perhaps more importantly, he had learned that everyone had something valuable to contribute, and that the greatest breakthroughs often came from the most unexpected places. The architect manuscript had taught them about advanced technologies and consciousness enhancement techniques, but it had also demonstrated the importance of approaching problems with humility, openness, and willingness to learn from others. These lessons, Marcus realized, might be even more valuable than the specific technical knowledge contained in the ancient text. Looking ahead, Marcus could see a future where the diverse species of the galaxy would continue to work together, building on the foundation left by the architects while developing their own unique path forward. The impossible language had been decoded not through the efforts of a single brilliant mind, but through the collaboration of different perspectives and approaches working in harmony. The story of the architect manuscript translation would be remembered not just as a scientific breakthrough, but as a demonstration of what could be accomplished when people from different backgrounds came together with mutual respect and shared purpose. The human janitor who read the impossible language like a menu had shown that wisdom could be found in the most unexpected places, and that sometimes the greatest discoveries required nothing more than a willingness to look at old problems in new ways. As Marcus prepared to embark on the next phase of his unexpected career as a xenolinguistic researcher, he carried with him the lessons learned from his journey from maintenance worker to scientific collaborator. The universe was vast and full of mysteries, but with patience, cooperation, and an openness to learning from each other, there was no puzzle that could not eventually be solved. The architects had left behind their knowledge as a gift to future civilizations, and Marcus was determined to ensure that gift would be used to build a better future for all the diverse species that called the galaxy home. The impossible language had revealed its secrets, but the greatest revelation was not about ancient technologies or consciousness enhancement techniques. It was about the power of human curiosity, the value of diverse perspectives, and the amazing things that could happen when people were willing to listen to ideas from unexpected sources. Marcus Dean, the janitor who changed galactic history, had proven that sometimes the most ordinary people could accomplish the most extraordinary things, simply by being willing to try a different approach and never being afraid to ask questions. And that was the end of the story. If you listened all the way to here, Don't forget to leave feedback about what you thought of the story in the comments, whether positive or negative. Your feedback helps us improve. Also, leave your like and subscribe to the channel for more stories like this one. And I'll leave here on the screen another video that I'm sure you'll like. Big hug, and see you in the next story.